Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining Retirement Income Intel with Income Lab. We'll give everyone just a moment to get to join the meeting here, and we'll get started. At the end of the webinar today, we will have a survey that has opportunity for feedback and a couple questions, so please take a moment to fill that out. Also, a couple people asked in advance if this will be recorded. It is recorded, and we will send it out tomorrow in a follow-up email. And if you have any questions along the way, please submit them into the Q&A. If we will address the most liked ones, there's a little thumbs up on the questions. So if you want to hear a question that your peer submitted, then please like that, and we'll address those liked ones first, just in case we run out of time. So with that, I will pass it over to Justin, and we will get started.
All right, thank you, Taylor, and thanks everybody for joining us to our webinar today on Does Probability of Success Lead Retirees to the Regret Zone? So a little less than a year ago, we had a webinar on moving beyond probability of success, problems with probability of success. That was a really successful webinar. I thought it was great. Still, a lot of people watched the recording of that one. And so this is kind of like a part two of that. And we're here with Jason Juhl from Carson Wealth and Ryan Townsley from Town Capital to talk about this. Two advisors with a lot of experience, both in the probability of success world and in the adjustment-based planning world. And so we're going to hear from them. We're also going to I'm going to start first by asking Jason and Ryan to talk a little bit about themselves and their practice. Then we're going to do a fun little exercise just to kind of get the juices flowing on probability of success, and then go into our panel discussion to hear about Jason and Ryan's experience with their retirement clients, and hopefully share a lot of great ideas about how to talk and do retirement income planning better with our clients, to hopefully give them better experiences in retirement, definitely better outcomes as well, better experiences, and avoiding regret and anxiety. So we'll start just by asking Jason and Ryan. We'll start with you, Jason, just to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your practice, and maybe a little bit about your use of Income Lab, how long you've been using the software.
Absolutely. Jason Juhl, partner, wealth advisor. Started the industry in 2009, worked with about 1,500 clients since that time frame, and ultimately worked with clients of all walks of life. And what I've really learned and realized is who I feel I can help the most is those nearing retirement and in retirement. And that's ultimately the perfect segue. Probability of success is something that I've utilized in the past and now focus much more on guardrails. And so excited to dive into the material and talk about those conversations and how fruitful those have become.
That's awesome. And 1,500 clients, not all today, right? Please tell me.
No. So I work currently assets under management about 550 million and just under 300 households.
Okay.
So I've refined my business substantially.
Yes. Still, that's a long breadth of experience. Ryan, how about you?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Ryan Townsley. I'm the owner of Town Capital. I'm actually a career-changing advisor. So I worked in the nuclear power industry for about 19 years before I made the change into financial planning. I did that about 5 years ago, dove right into starting my own firm. And so I work with a lot of people from that industry or other analytical types like physicists and chemists and mathematicians. And so very analytical group. For my practice, started about 5 years ago, grew to about $100 million under management for about 78 households right now. And about 90% of my clients are either retired or retiring in the next 2 years. So this is a very important topic to me.
Awesome. All right. Just to, as I said, get the juices flowing here, I'm going to pull up a little probably take 10 minutes here to just go through some things with the audience. So this is a silent poll. There's no, you don't just answer these for yourself. We don't have a little place that you could, put in the answers. That would be kind of cool. But if you use probability of success in your practice, and not everybody does, if you don't, you can just sit this one out or imagine if you did, what your answers would be. What do you think a reasonable probability of success is for a client retirement plan at retirement? And then as time goes on, that probability of success would change. At what point do you think your clients would start getting worried? And when do you think you would start getting worried for your clients? All right. So think about those. Jot them down if you want. Okay. So we'll be talking a fair amount about this, but what survey research seems to show is that when you ask retirees what they want, their highest priorities tend to be the kinds of things you could put under the live a good life umbrella, right? It could be live a fulfilling life. On the negative side, you will hear things like don't be a burden on my kids, don't run out of money, but it generally tends to be around like the stuff of life while you're alive. The leave money behind when I die priority tends to be extremely low if it's mentioned at all. And definitely in my experience talking with advisors, the I want my last check to bounce goal is not uncommon. When we were first building Income Lab, advisors told us this was a common conversation, especially when they had first started doing retirement planning, is they would ask a client who was nearing retirement, so how much would you like to spend? And they would say, well, how much can I have? So we definitely built Income Lab originally around this, and many of you know this, that it's built around this question, what can I spend at any given time? And if you were trying to come up with a kind of best guess or most likely answer to that question long ago, and even today, many people might just kind of use time value of money calculations. Now, you can't actually do this if you're doing, if you've got Social Security that starts in 5 years and a rental property that's this, that, and the other thing. And, when things get complicated, you can't use a financial calculator anymore. But basically, you would take an average expected return, most likely return, just by definition. When you use an average, that's what you're saying. If you didn't think that was a good guess, you'd use a different average, and you put that into here, right? But most people actually use some kind of simulation analysis, usually Monte Carlo simulation analysis. And if we imagine that, that's basically saying, hey, here's a bunch of ways the future could go for you. And for each of those, there's a spending level that hits all your goals, but doesn't, leave too much behind when you die, right? So hits them exactly. And we could line those spending levels up like this. And if you saw a graph like this and you said, what's my best guess? Where would I go on this graph? If this were, a game in Vegas, where would you put your chips? Well, you'd put them right there, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious. But if that were a probability of success, what is that? It's 50%. It's a 50% probability of success. That's the best guess. That's the most likely outcome, in other words. Doesn't mean it's the right outcome. It just means it's the best guess at the outcome, the most likely one, right? Okay, so where would 100% probability of success lie here? So the spending level, you're messing with your software, you're trying to figure out a spending level, and you want to get it to 100%. Where would that spending level be on this graph? It'd be right there on the left, right? It is the spending level where 100%, 1,000 out of 1,000 times you could have spent more. That's what that means. 100% success means 100% chance I could have spent more. In other words, when we're using probability of success and it's driving us toward that 100, because it's a score, I want success as much as the next guy, right? I want it to be 100. What I'm really doing is saying, I'm predicting you're underspending by this much. Right? That is what that means. The problem is that's not what success means to your clients and probably to you, right? The word success already means something. We're going to talk a lot about that with Ryan and Jason. But probability of success thinks it means, be like Ebenezer Scrooge, right? be a miser, leave a lot of money behind when you die. And by the way, be worried while you do it. All right. And so there's a thing going on here where this word success it's fooling us. It's distorting the world. And just having seen this, it's not going to help. It's not going to help that you now know that probability of success, 100% probability of success means 100% chance of underspending, or as we'll talk about, 100% chance of regret. Because it's like an optical illusion. Like, have you seen this before? Say to yourself, which line is shorter? Now, probably a lot of people have seen it, and you know that actually they're the same length. They're exactly the same length. But look left to right. It doesn't matter. Knowing that it's the same length doesn't change. Your brain still makes you see the bottom one as shorter. It's the same with probability of success. So if you give me a probability of success plan, I'm going to want it to be 100. Try to convince me. Just try to convince me that 50% success is better than 100. Not a chance, right? So this is a nice little segue to that conversation about the problems with probability of success, and kind of why it's so important that that we take this really seriously. So that's this you saw kind of the mathematical side of it, but I think we'll dive a little bit more into the client communication and experience side of it now. So I think let me jump to you, Jason, and just kind of if you want to take this ball and run with it on kind of your experience with clients as they enter retirement and go into retirement, in helping them, what their goals are, what their worries are, and where you've seen kind of them unable to kind of match their goals with what they actually do in retirement.
Yeah, certainly a unique transition from work life to retirement. And in your work life, you've been saving, you've been investing, you've been saving, you've been investing, you're amassing this nest egg that eventually is going to generate you income in retirement. So you make it to retirement, you throw your hands in the air, and now your paycheck goes away. And there becomes this anxiety. How do we turn our investment accounts, our retirement accounts, and our assets into income? And how do we replace our paycheck? Well, yeah, Social Security is going to be a piece. Maybe we're fortunate enough to have a pension as a piece, but ultimately, how do we take distributions from our accounts in order to generate not only income, but tax efficient income? And so that's really where rubber meets the road. And the challenge that I've seen with retirees is they're very frugal in their working years. They're making these sacrifices. And when they get to retirement and their paycheck goes away, they almost tighten up their purse strings by 2, by 5, by 10. They get even more frugal. And so what's the risk of getting more frugal? Well, they're concerned about running out of money is their number one concern. And in turn, they end up making even more sacrifices in retirement and potentially delaying some of their goals, right? And this is where we'd like to talk about the difference between lifespan and health span. So let's think about that. Lifespan, let's say we're going to live into our 90s. We're planning on our financial plan is established, thinking our clients are going to live into the 90s. And their health could be taken away at a much younger age. For example, my father, my dad, they've had some financial challenges. They're actually misguided by an advisor. So that was a challenge. He delayed his retirement. He's going to retire this summer. So we're excited about that. But unfortunately, what's happened is he's had a double hip replacement. He's been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and he's got a pinched nerve in his back. So he's in bad shape. And the vision he painted for retirement, the picture he painted, his Picasso, there's a lot of question marks around that because of his health. And so the point is, let's take advantage of our health early in retirement, let's give ourselves permission to spend some of our hard-earned money early in retirement, where we likely will spend more, those go-go years, if you will, when we are healthy. And let's pursue some of those goals. How do we give our clients confidence around their spending capacity? And that's ultimately where Income Lab and the guardrails come into play.
That makes a lot of sense. I really like that terminology, the lifespan and health span, because it's not just about how long you live. It's about, what you can do to make your life, hopefully as fulfilling as possible at each point. And that's just there's a different answer for different phases of life. This time of year in particular, I like to mention my grandma. She's 90 now, and she's a huge college basketball fan. So this is her time. But in her 60s, she'd spent more. I mean, she was never like a massive spender. She was a teacher her whole life, but she went to Hawaii, she went to California, she'd do some travel. Now she likes to read library books and watch college basketball. That's just a less expensive thing to do, right? So I know, Ryan, you actually have a really interesting way of talking about exactly that, and introducing this idea of the regret zone, which is kind of like when your health span, or even just, well, I guess it is your health span, even if you're not, particularly unhealthy, just by the time you're in your 80s and 90s, it's different than it was before. About introducing that concept with clients and the concept of regret. How do you do that?
So I use a pretty simple illustration, Justin, and this is great for not only communicating with clients, but also communicating with prospective clients, right? It's a great marketing tool as well. And if you have clients that are they read about finance and they do their own research and they've done their due diligence, especially when it comes to picking an advisor, then they have definitely run across things like the 4% rule and other types of what you'd call a standard inflation adjusted spending path, right? So they're very familiar with that. And it's kind of second nature to them to think that that's what they should do, that they should start at a particular income and then just increase that by inflation every single year. And that's kind of, very simply shown by this illustration in front of you, where you just have really a straight line in the up diagonal direction showing that we're going to start at a particular income and then we're going to move up with inflation every single year. So really our today's dollars or our real dollars stay exactly the same through our whole life. So go ahead, next slide, Justin. So then I like to show them, well, okay, what if we do it a little bit different and we use an age-based spending path, and we say, well, maybe we're going to look at retiree data and life expectancies and just other types of information to say, okay, how do retirees actually spend money throughout the course of retirement? And in the beginning of the retirement, maybe we spend a little bit more, and then later in retirement, maybe we spend less. And then I like to overlay the graphs, and that's the next slide, Justin, and show them what the difference is, where if you have this just simple inflation adjusted spending path, this linear path, and then you overlay the age-based spending path, you can see that the age-based starts at a higher value and ends at a lower value. But for the math people out there, if you look at this and kind of say, okay, what's the area under the curve or the total spending, it may actually be the same. So really all we're doing is just shifting the spending profile up into the front in those early healthy go-go years, if we will. And go ahead to the next slide. And I say this is what I believe is one of the biggest risks in retirement, because time is a precious commodity and there's nothing you can do to get more time back. And using an inflation adjusted spending path, there is a point where you can get to somewhere in life where you've been underspending. So your nest egg has probably grown significantly. You haven't been doing the things that you wanted to do because you limited yourself early. And now you look back and say, man, in those early years when I had my health and I had my mobility and everything, I really wish I would have done more. Another way to put that, next slide, Justin, is in the beginning, if you're using that simple spending path, I have the health and energy, but not enough income because you're limiting yourself. But then later in life, you realize I really do have the income, but now I don't have the health and energy. And I kind of overlaid the go-go, slow-go, and the no-go years in there.
Yeah, I think this is amazing, like just set of terms for people. Well, hey, what kind of response do you get from people when you introduce this idea of like, one of my goals is to avoid you hitting the regret point and looking back and saying, I don't have the health, but I do have the income? Like, what do they say?
The most common response is, I've never thought of that. I've never considered an adaptive, a spending plan that was not linear, right? That didn't just start at a particular income and end at a particular income. So having not be introduced to it, never, been familiarized, it's nothing that it's something that people don't even really consider until you put it in front of them. And after seeing it, they're like, wow, that really does make sense. And I would rather, this is response from most clients, I would much rather do the things early in life, knowing I may not be able to do them later.
Yeah. Have both of you, I've heard this story a lot, but about people, kind of not only sort of underspending in early years, but worrying about it this whole time, and then reaching that point where there's this like aha moment of, oh my gosh, I can't possibly spend this money. Do you either of you have kind of anecdotes or stories about just seeing clients kind of negatively affected psychologically by the framing of retirement as success and failure, and that that way that makes them, I mean, Jason, I thought your point was really good, where they even get more conservative and frugal when they retire instead of kind of enjoying what they could.
Yeah, a couple thoughts come to mind. Justin, you and I have talked about this a fair amount, and when we're dealing with probability of success, we all have a version of success in our mind. And as success relates to scoring, 100% is success, right? Like, it's ingrained in us at a very young age to strive for A's or whatever grades they use now. I don't know, do they grade kids these days? I don't even know how it works, but we strive for A's, we strive for 100%. And so if we're scoring a person's financial success in retirement, they naturally, as high performers, high achievers, successful individuals and folks that we work with as retirees, they're striving to get a 100. What they don't realize is that's actually not optimal. And when I'll ask a question specific to, money to leave behind to heirs. And the most common answer, no matter a person's net worth, our minimum's $1 million. I've got $50 million clients, but the moral of the story is what's left. You get what you get, and don't throw a fit. And so the challenge with that 100% score is you're going to leave a lot behind. And once you can convey the message that there is going to be a very, very large nest egg at end of plan, end of life, it does change their tune. They start to rethink it a little bit. But that's where the guardrails come into play, and we start to focus more on spending capacity. And what are your true goals in retirement? And that's where I'll ask a question just about, tell me about a few of your fondest memories. Well, when you think about memories are usually, vacations or time with family. They're more sentimental in nature. And so as we think about those memories, that starts to recreate success in our clients' minds. And they start to focus less on the score, and they start to think about the memories that they want to create. And how do you create those memories? Well, you need to turn your hard-earned assets into income, because oftentimes to create those experiences, it costs money to do so. And so that's the go-go years where you're reaping the fruits of your labor, and the regret zone. Let's help our clients understand how much they truly can spend and what their assets support from a spending capacity perspective.
I've heard that a lot, that in order to overcome the anxiety at retirement, because the worry is running out of money, you got to shift them to something. You got to give them something, give them a goal, right? And that idea of like, hey, what are the times in your life that have been most meaningful, most fulfilling, is a really great way to do that. And then the other thing I've heard is really, I mean, basically what you're saying is you can't show them probability of success, because it is, you will want the score to be 100. And whether they know it or not, that's going to mean they'll end up in the regret zone. So, typically what we've heard advisors say, and Ryan, I'd be curious how you do this with clients is talking about, and I'll even pull up a dashboard here just to show what this looks like. How do you talk about spending capacity, adjustments, guardrails, you know, in a way that just avoids this whole probability of success score idea?
And this was actually a very big improvement in my ability to, I'd say, keep retirees calm during rough seas or tough times. You know, probability of success inherently, you know, if you see it change, especially when you work with people who are very in tune with their plan, their finances, and who pay very close attention to that probability of success number, if they see it change, that's automatically going to cause some amount of fear and uncertainty. And even if it changes by 1%, right, it's still a change. And introducing the spending capacity and then the protection side of it, you know, by adding in the guardrails, instead of making it a qualitative thing where your number, you know, your probability of success has changed, but we don't really know what that means as far as, you know, what kind of changes, what kind of adjustments does a retiree need to make, if any, to keep the plan on course. The guardrails are definitive, right? Those clients can look at those and say, this is where we need to consider making some changes to protect myself. So, you know, you could use a million different metaphors and say, you know, we set off a course, we're flying a plane, and, you know, if the plane had a 72% or an 83% chance of being successful, wherever, that would scare you. And if you knew that that was your probability of having a successful flight, where if you say, these are the altitudes we need to stay between, and if we're veering towards these other altitudes, we need to make a course correction to make sure that we make it safely, that's a lot easier. And there's a lot of different ways you can tailor that to your individual industry. You know, I use nuclear themes a lot when I'm talking about it, but it really just takes the uncertainty out of the conversation that probability of success tends to breed. And it just, you know, I don't know, Justin, do you want me to jump in and just talk about my experience?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. So in 2020, during COVID, the market drop, I was using probability of success. And we all know there was definitely some changes in the meters, even if they were small, right? Just depending on the individual client. But it was a very, for me as an advisor, very reactive type of situation where I was responding to clients' worries about changes in their probability of success during that event. And then fast forward to 2022, I'm now exclusively using guardrails and things like that. And the market downturn was really, it's just a much different experience for my clients and for me as an advisor, and allowed me to be proactive and, you know, do webinars and mass rather than have a lot of individual communication. So the efficiency was just much better. And it was a completely different experience, you know, two, I won't say similar market downturns, but a down market's a down market, but two completely different experiences and outcomes using one method over the other.
I like that term you used and kind of referred to here. You had meter watchers, right? People watching the meter in 2020. And I mean, I've definitely heard that story, especially about 2022. And you can see this is just a, you know, a stress test of a plan, and it's got 2020 and 2022 in it, where our probability of success might have gone from, you know, in this case, 90 to 60 or 55 or something. I don't know. In this case, back in 2020, maybe it wasn't as big, although it was really quick. And so you had these meter watchers, and you said, I mean, those big swings, I can get it, why somebody would be confused or upset or whatever. You said, I mean, people were, even if it was off by a couple points, you know, a score feels like it's a final score, like you already got your score. So were you, what was the experience of your clients who were meter watchers when you said, you know what, we're going to talk about balancing risk, we're going to talk about keeping you on track, we're going to talk about guardrails, forget about that score thing?
Just a lot more calm, which was, you know, the calm for them, calm for me, right? I was able to be proactive and reach out and say, hey, just remember, during events like this, guardrails are the key. And they could look at their current location in their plan. And Justin, do you want to maximize, like, where you click on the plan for income increase so we can see kind of where you plot on the guardrails?
Sure.
This is a great visual for a client in that during any type of event, they know where they're at, and they know where their next increase would be. They know where their potential decrease would be. And if they're staying within there, then they really, you know, especially during 2022, I didn't really have many clients even come close to a lower guardrail. And looking at this visual versus seeing your meter change, right, if you will, your probability of success, really just, you know, allowed them to know, I know exactly where I'm at. I know if we get to a particular level, we'll have to make a change. And most importantly, that change is already predefined. You can see that the recommended pay decrease is plotted right there on the right at $900. So, and most clients look at the whatever the projected decrease would be and say, overall, that's really not a large portion of my income. It's a reasonable amount to protect myself and my family. It's just overall just a much better experience for me, for the clients, and you know that just led to, I'd say, a lot more confidence in my clients, in me, and also a lot more confidence in me and as an advisor, knowing that I'm, you know, guiding them in the correct direction.
Yeah. And for those, go ahead.
If I could add to that, Justin, I heard this formula recently, and it goes to the effect of happiness equals reality minus expectations. So how is that relevant to guardrails versus probability success? Probability success, clients have their identity tied up in this score. How many of us have, you know, biannual reviews, wealth plans, strategy sessions, call it what you want to call it, where you revisit the probability of success and that score changed? And if the score goes up, that's great. They're now identifying as a 95. If the score goes down, they still identify as a 95 and there's question marks. Why is that score less? Well, the happiness factor is failed because they had an expectation and the reality now is a lesser score. Therefore, their satisfaction, their happiness is lower. Whereas the guardrails are incredible and very helpful because it sets an expectation. And therefore, the reality and the expectation is much easier to track and to follow, because here it is, as we have fluctuations in the market and or a portfolio fluctuates accordingly, we have these predetermined, identified dollar amounts, asset figures. And in turn, we have a marriage between the balance and the income. And so the expectation is very, very clear cut, which is why I think more than likely, Ryan, you have less, less question marks, and you're actually able to be more proactive now because we're not fielding the calls that we were fielding before because someone logged in to their probability success plan and their score was down. And so it allows us to free up our time. And there's actually a scalability factor that comes into play. So as advisors now, our practices become more scalable because we can actually serve more clients in a proactive nature versus being reactive and it taking up more of our time than we'd maybe anticipated.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard some talk about what happens in a practice when, there's a market downturn, 90s are going to, in 2022, I heard a lot that went into the 60s or 50s. And that causes all this work in the practice for you and your team, fielding calls. And then I've also heard where clients really insist, no, we need to rework my plan now, right? Like, let's get that score back up because they're in score competition. Or I love what you said, expectation minus reality. That's so expectations, set the expectations right. Did either of you have that experience maybe in 2022 or 2020? And what kinds of things are clients kind of forcing you to do if you're using probability of success?
Well, in 2020, it was just like you said, Justin, let's get this score back up, and I don't care what it takes. So let's make adjustments and let's change spending and let's do all these maybe kind of knee-jerk and drastic things to get back to where it was. Especially if you work, any advisors out there that work with a tight-knit group of clients, or like clients maybe from like one company or one industry or anything, they talk and they share their scores, right? They share their probability of success. And there is a comparison in there. So if you have one client talking to another and they say, well, mine's 93 and mine's 95, and that adds a whole nother layer of complexity on there. And just the experience of I said, very reactive with probability of success rather than with guardrails. It's very proactive.
And you said, Ryan, I think you said in 2022, you were able to kind of just do some like group webinars and things instead of kind of fielding the, everything's on fire phone calls. What sorts of things would you cover there?
I really just cover the market, in different, different areas, just market economy. And then I would move into the history of the market, just to kind of reiterate and remind people that these things typically come out just fine, and long term it's great to stay invested in. So just some pretty generic investing concepts. And then I would always at the end, so it was the most fresh in everyone's mind, to say, and I would cover the guardrails, not any persons in particular, because this webinar was en masse, but cover the guardrail concept and encourage everybody to go look at their guardrails and to see where they're at and look at the potential spending cut if it were to happen. And it's just super efficient to be able to do that to all of your clients at once. And it's not like I'm trying to avoid talking to any clients individually. That is by no means. But if I want to talk to them, I'd rather talk to them about the next great thing that we're going to do, or the next module in their financial planning that we're going to work on, rather than trying to convince them individually each that everything's going to be okay with this market downturn. So scalability, efficiency, all those just increase drastically, being able to get ahead of the game with something like this.
Ryan, I think you said something really powerful there, and it sounded like maybe your clients have competition amongst each other, and they're striving. They're in similar social circles, what have you, and they're striving who has the best score. And so I think that just goes back to a really, really young age, right? We all probably remember when we first graduated college, we wanted to build up our nest egg. And we wanted to save money. And I remember my first goal was I wanted to have $10,000 set aside, right? And then you build up that rainy day nest egg, and then you start saving into your investment accounts. And you're always kind of striving for a number. But the reason we strive for that number is when we do reach that pinnacle, when we do reach retirement, it's so we can enjoy the fruits of our labor. And that's much more in relation to satisfaction of life and less about the balances in our accounts. And that goes back to the spending capacity. And so that's where we spend the majority of our time in conversation. But there's a psychological challenge, and it does take time. And it's not just a one conversation and done, but there's a comfortability that occurs where clients will get more comfortable with their ability to spend more based on this guardrail system than what they maybe originally through a retirement plan. There's more probability of success and what spending capacity they felt was appropriate with that probability of success.
So are there ways that you talk about spending capacity with clients that just really ring true with them? What were, I think a lot of people on this webinar are probably wondering, like, I'm used to talking about it with probability of success. How do I make the shift? And each person's language might be a little bit different, but what are some things that really work with your clients? Either one of you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure, like most folks on this call, in our minds, we make it into a really big deal. And we come up with all these objections. And what I was thinking was, okay, I've worked with, these senior leaders for X number of years, have been focused on probability of success. And, we've helped them be very successful, helped them with their deferred comp, their restricted shares, and improve their score so they can live the life that they had dreamt and deserved. And here now I'm going to pivot completely, and it's going to go terrible. The reality is there's almost a sigh of relief that we're no longer focused on a score. And we're now focused on the quality of life that we're going to live and the income that they're going to have in retirement and the goals they're going to be able to fulfill with that income, the memories that they're going to be able to make. So I ask them point blank. When I do the comparison, you know, when we've done probability versus when we switch to guardrails, how does this feel? You know, which one do you prefer? And inevitably, it is guardrails, because it's happiness equals reality minus expectations. It's just there's a crystal clear understanding and there's a definitive expectation.
I think we've had. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that so I did in the early days of incorporating Income Lab, like a true engineer, I did some A/B testing, and some, you know, client feedback and things like that. And it was for retirees and soon to be retirees. They just said that it painted a very clear picture of their ability to spend where probability of success did not. Probability of success was very subjective and very, you know, just not, and working with people who need to be, you know, especially engineer type, analytical type, they want defined answers, and probability of success is not a defined answer. It's a range. It's a, you know, it's exactly it's achieving what it's meant to do, but it's not the ideal situation for a client that is already going into one of the biggest life changes that they'll ever have, right? Going from working however many hours a day a week to not working, right? Going from being an accumulator to a decumulator, going from being a saver to a spender, all those things. It's a big life change, and the ability to alleviate as much anxiety and uncertainty during that transition really does make the retiree, I've seen, much more confident, much more in tune with their plan, and makes them comfortable with spending at a higher level when I believe they otherwise would not.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's the you know, you'll see in the press, you know, things about a retirement crisis. And for part of the population, a large part of the population, there's a crisis of not being able to spend enough because they don't have enough resources. For most people who have a financial advisor, what I've heard is it's the opposite problem. It's the not being able to spend, not feeling they have the permission to spend. And that's the real nut you're trying to crack. It sounds like both of you have a good jump on that. We've got a couple of questions that are coming in. I'm sure we'll have some others, but I wanted to address some of these. One, somebody was asking, Monte Carlo can be run with guardrails. Why are we asking competitors? I think we've been really careful with our wording here, but just to make it clearer, what the problem is here is probability of success, which is not the same thing as Monte Carlo. It is a way to report Monte Carlo or really any simulation results. So you can do a whole bunch of simulations. How you talk about or how you use those results is what we're talking about. So using a single score, which is probability of success, is one of the problems that we're identifying here. And maybe a way to look at this, you know, I showed the you know, that bell curve before, but if you just kind of look at it on a number line here, risk of underspending is probability of success. Like they're the same thing. And so what we're saying is you're getting only half the picture. Yeah, there is a risk of overspending as well, and that's the one most people care about and worry about. But the risk of underspending is a problem as well. The best guess level is the one that balances these two. Best guess, by the way, doesn't mean best advice. So often people will target a spending level that is not at 50-50, right? It'll be to the left. It'll be in the underspending zone, but not so pegged to the left that you know, that your clients are likely to not hit their goals. So I think that's hopefully that clears up. I know that was one that had a lot of upvotes. Let me see. We've had a few questions about like if there's any place you use Monte Carlo, well, sorry, probability of success, because Monte Carlo, I mean, you can use Monte Carlo in Income Lab, right? Have you just basically gotten rid of probability of success from your practice, or are there places where you still feel it works?
I do still use it for, which is a very low population of our clientele. This is a retirement planning firm. So most are with that. So probability of success would be more for, I'd say, a younger person just getting started in saving, because it does show, very good the impact of, okay, if we do X, Y, and Z, how much is it going to move the meter? Even though they don't really know how, they're not. So let's say they're just getting started in investing, they don't really understand a lot of the concepts. It's really easy to see when your meter moves from 20% to 30 to 50 to 100 or so. And so, yes, I do still use it for that, but for retirees, exclusively Income Lab.
Yeah, I feel as if that probability of success is for the accumulation phase. It's appropriate for the accumulation phase. Then once you get about 5 years pre-retirement through end of life, decumulation seems to be the focus, income replacement. Tax efficiency is a huge, it's on our clients' minds. And that's definitely a big differentiation point with our practice as we think about our competitors here in Des Moines, Iowa. And taxes are on the top of people's mind. They really are. And one phrase I'll use is, I'm comfortable paying my fair share, but I don't want to tip the government. And that's what the tax center allows us to do, right? And I know this is more about guardrails, but it's all interrelated. And when you think about decumulation, when you think about income, when you think about a person's spending capacity, we want to try to limit their taxes the best we can. And so, a conversation for another day, but that's where the tax center comes into play.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, Jason. And I agree with you 100% that if there's the two most effective marketing and client acquisition tools that I have are being able to show people guardrails and spending plans versus probability of success, and kind of show them those 4 slides, and to show them the tax lab and income lab, hands down.
So this in particular, kind of the tax efficiency. It sounds like what you're able to do by not having a score focus is you're shifting to, how are we going to do this? Like, let's get, it's no longer about measuring yourself and, am I doing well enough? Like, hey, we planned, we've done what we can do. Now we've got what we've got. Let's go do this, right? And how are we going to do it best? Right. So, I mean, there really aren't scores here. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could view tax savings as a score, but hey, nobody's going to worry about a lot of tax savings. So it's no longer about well, if you do that, that's really dangerous. It's about how are we going to do this exactly? Let's see what other questions we've got here. We had a few questions, I think, for you, Ryan, on the regret zone piece, and kind of talking about, long-term care, or I can probably address this one on sequence of return risk, but can you address kind of the later in life, possibly having higher spending, and do people, ask that question, and how do you account for that?
Yeah, that's a great point that needs to be definitely looked at, addressed. But what I say is there's other ways for us to plan for long-term care, right? We can either look at the insurance route and look at that. We can come up with, maybe using a home equity plan or something like that. But then there's also just building in maybe a false floor into the plan, where we say, instead of focusing on all this underspending in the beginning to have money for long-term care later, let's just build our zero. So the assets that we're kind of shooting for, let's say instead of, trying to spend down to zero and bounce that last check, we set our false zero at 200,000, and that's our parachute to pull if we do have a long-term care event. And if you don't end up using it, then that is just more money that will go to the next generation, or we can adjust it at any time through your life. And You can easily accomplish that in Income Lab using the legacy feature. It's pretty much the same thing. So yes, we do talk about that, and everybody gets a long-term care plan, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to underspend early just to save money for that. There's other ways that we like to plan for it.
Yeah, and I think this may kind of get at the concept of kind of holistic planning here. Like all of that would be included in kind of where this graph begins, right? So if you have $1 million and you're trying to leave $1 million, well, that all these income levels are going to be lower than if you were trying to leave zero, right? If you're trying to leave zero, they'll all be higher. So all of that really needs to be taken into account. The same thing, somebody asked a question about sequence of return risk. If you're invested more in equities or more in bonds, or if your portfolio is a bigger part of your income versus a smaller part, that is also going to have a big effect on what you're telling clients their spending capacity is and where their guardrails are, right? Because if you're not depending heavily on your portfolio, you're gonna have really wide guardrails, right? If you're depending heavily on the portfolio and it's a portfolio with a lot of volatility, that might be narrower. So the key is, I think, when you have those parts of a plan, whether it's long-term care, legacy goals, worries about sequence of returns, included in the plan, instead of kind of saying, oh, I'll sort of do an after the fact, put my hand on the scale, like just include it in the plan and you'll get it there. So maybe another way of saying that is this whole underspending, overspending thing, that includes whatever your sequence of return risk is, whatever your inflation risk is, whatever your mortality risk is, all of that should be included in, am I overspending or underspending at any given point? It's not a separate question. All right. Taylor, have you been monitoring the Q&A? Are there some other?
Yeah. So there is a couple questions for Ryan with Right Capital, using Right Capital and using it for younger clients. We got one in advance and one now. So I know that you said your business is people who are in retirement or near retirement. And maybe Jason has some insight on this, but using it for someone in their 40s, and if you're using it with Right Capital, can you address how you use it for younger clients at all?
I typically don't use it for younger clients. Jason, I don't know if you kind of mentioned that the 5-year out is very appropriate, and I agree with that. That's a great time to start looking at just that shift in mentality. But
okay. And then there's another question here about how do you know if income is actually enough? Many plans have withdrawals with major events that are not just monthly cash flowed.
Yeah, so another concept that there's a lot of different ways to do that is you could look at an easy way is like, what is their current bring home from their salary and bonuses and things like that, and then equate that to what their spending capacity is in Income Lab to see if it's enough, right? That's a really easy, but we need to dive deeper, but it's a really easy way to just start somewhere, right? Also, there's other ways to achieve that. Like for a lot of my retirees, I'll create a slush fund. So it's a portion of funds that do not go into the calculation with Income Lab. So Income Lab is meant to give them their spending capacity on a month-to-month and a year-to-year basis. That slush fund is available for them to reach into and pull larger amounts of money, or to be more flexible if something breaks around the house, or they want to take a large vacation and take the whole family, or do all of those things. And it doesn't affect the calculations in Income Lab because it's disregarded. But with the understanding that if the slush fund is spent and the market is not great to us, we may not be able to replenish it. So it is used sparingly, right? But that creates the flexibility to be able to reach in and fix things around the house or deal with unexpected expenses and things like that. And that way Income Lab is telling you, okay, here's what your paycheck is going to be. Your slush fund is now your savings that you can reach in and do things other than that with.
Jason, do you want to add anything, or we can move on to the next question?
Yeah, we'll typically, if you're anything like me, there's always unexpected expenses, right? Like that's life. There are always unexpected expenses, depending on the dollar amount. But you can actually model those unexpected expenses, every few years, you're going to need to take a larger distribution. I just modeled one yesterday. They're thinking about buying a house. And so what's the impact to our spending capacity if we pay cash versus finance? So there's a number of modeling that you can do. What I've found is most of our clients are not taking a distribution as large as their spending capacity might indicate. We're in that process of moving from the probability of success to guardrails. That process is super simple. That process is really been done. But part of the process then after you've moved to guardrails is actually helping clients get comfortable with the spending capacity and the income, the size of distribution they're eligible for, compared to what they had been getting when we were focused on probability success. Does that make sense?
This can be a little, jarring for people who are used to a software that depends on the what do you want to spend answer. But in Income Lab, you actually don't need any expenses in the plan. And if it didn't have any expenses in the plan, it would basically say, well, you can spend this. You didn't tell us how you're going to spend it, so you got a surplus. So this plan, even though it has Roth conversions and big taxes and stuff, it's got a $38,000 surplus for 2024. Now it's up to you and the client to figure out, does that mean this plan is actually a little too aggressive on the income? We don't need all that, or having a little buffer, like living within your means it's good. And as you say, Jason, I mean, if you need a new roof this year, well, hopefully it's not 40 grand, but maybe 10, 15, right? So that could be a good reason to have that.
What also happens is, we'll have clients that don't take the pay raise. So let's say we hit the top guardrail and they're eligible for a pay raise. They don't take the pay raise. And then that just gives them that much more cushion.
Right.
Before they would potentially have to endure a down market and hit the lower guardrail. And in turn, that allows them to take some ad hoc one-off distributions without much impact, if any, to the plan.
Right.
Yeah, same here. We do the same thing. And then if a client says that, when we show them their spending capacity, they say, wow, that's way too much money. I say, well, all right, great. Well, let's figure out what you want to take, and then let's make a plan for the rest. Are there philanthropic goals you want to meet? Do you want to Roth convert more to leave more to yourself or the next generation tax free? There's a lot of other. That's a whole nother conversation starter of what are the other goals we can help people achieve if they do have to where they want to spend less than what they can spend.
Right. I think we had one more question that maybe we have time for real quick here. At what point in a market downturn do you begin making reductions in distributions, and when does it come back to normal? So I think there's sort of a theoretical answer to that, which is, we go back to this and just say, when the risk of continuing to do the same thing, when you're in the overspending zone, typically far into the overspending zone, that's when you would make the adjustment. And that's where the guardrails are set. The red guardrail is going to be in the overspending zone. It's not going to be, in here, because if my, risk of underspending, my probability of success goes from 75, or 100 to 70, I'm still deep in the underspending zone. It would make no sense whatsoever to make an adjustment here. We got to do it when we're over here. I don't know if either of you have actually, had a client have to adjust, but how have you dealt with that?
I've not had a client had to make an adjustment on the downside, only on the upside, which is a pleasant conversation.
Yeah.
It also, that having downside guardrails also can communicate what the effects are of overspending. Like if you have somebody that is taking a certain amount of monthly, but then they want to take a large amount out to gift to the kids or to do something with, you say, well, we don't necessarily need to change your spending, but it is driving you much closer to a guardrail. And then it's much more likely that you're going to have to make that downside adjustment earlier than you would have, or at all than you normally would have. But luckily, no, during both downturns, I have not had a client hit a downside guardrail.
All right.
And we are at the end of time, but we have something big to talk about. I know that we have gone a little over time. For those who can stay, we do have something big that we want to tackle here. So we are launching a new master class series that Justin will be pulling up here and going over with Jason Juhl. But first, while he pulls that up, Ryan and Jason, thank you so much for attending and being a voice today. It was a great webinar and we have many questions left, so we'll share those with you as well. So with that, Justin and Jason will have a 6-part masterclass series starting April 9th. It's coming in your emails, and it was sent out in the registration email for this as well. So Justin, do you want to go over this with Jason?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of demand from advisors to dive deep into practice management and the concepts behind the retirement planning and tax planning in Income Lab. So this is an every 2-week webinar series starting April 9th. There is one spot between the 7th and the 28th where there's a 3-week gap. But otherwise, it's every 2 weeks. It's an hour, and the plan is to cover both theory and practice, and to have takeaways that you can actually use in some way in your practice. So actual things that will get you in email, whether that's marketing ideas or kind of talk tracks and things like that. Examples and so on. So we're really excited about this. These are, I think, at the same time as our normal webinars. So if you're able to make these, you'd probably be able to make this as well. And we will be announcing these, really soon via email and social media and so on.
Yeah, they are. Some of them are at the beginning of the month, like next month, which is April 9th. So please look for our follow-up email. We will have a recording of this webinar tomorrow, a link to register for this webinar. And there was a question about providing the slides. I don't know, is that something that we
yeah, I can look at that.
Okay,
I think we're going to try to get out some of those, especially the slides I went over at the beginning.
Okay. And we will get some of those slides out as well. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Ryan and Jason, again. We truly appreciate it. Always a blast.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Bye.